So what is preserved equity? At SBP, we coined the term preserved equity as a way of telling stories about the amount of value we're providing directly to homeowners. So basically, it's a way of saying that like we have helped homeowners retain this much of their generational wealth, which I'll get into a little bit after this. It's a way that we can say the amount of value we're providing directly to homeowners without saying how much money we spent on properties. And it's also a way that we can describe return on investment for funder dollars. It's using our why to develop a measurement for ROI. So one reason we repair homes after disaster is to preserve generational wealth for underserved homeowners. How do we measure that? How do we tell people about that and explain the value of that? So I'll start with like some background, just what is equity? So we're talking about preserved equity. What is equity? The accounting equation is assets minus liabilities equals equity. So basically, everything that a person has minus everything that they owe to somebody else is the amount of equity that they have. That's also like how you would calculate net worth. It's the same kind of terminology. So when we're talking about homeowner equity, we're talking about the value of a home minus the value of their mortgage, because that's what somebody owes on the property, and that's their homeowner equity. So it's the amount of wealth that a homeowner has stored in their home. And this is really a really important thing, especially for individuals who are in lower class environments. There tends to be a correlation with the lower a family's generational wealth, the more likely it is that most of that is in home ownership. So parents and grandparents' wealth are excellent predictors of a child's adult wealth. So if your grandparents were super rich, you're much more likely to be rich yourself. Intergenerational wealth transmission is a major reason for wealth persistence. So like the ability of your grandparents to pass that money, those assets down to you is one of the main ways that wealth is built in our current society. And because, again, home ownership is a disproportionately large part of that for a lot of lower income families, home ownership is one of the major channels through which intergenerational wealth flows. So as I was saying, home ownership generally represents the largest portions of a household's wealth. Wealth inequality is much greater than income inequality alone. So like, it's not just the idea that like you make more than I do, it's that you have assets and other income than just like what you're making. So things that have been left to you, property that you own. And again, it's more important to the lower portion of wealth distribution. So when wealth is transferred in the form of home ownership, it represents a transition of an asset, but it also removes the liability of housing-related debt or expense. So if I inherit a house, not only do I have that asset now, I'm no longer paying rent or a mortgage. I have to pay like taxes, but the same as someone else who owns a mortgage would. Because of that, it provides more advantage than just the asset itself. It's the cost of the asset that is incorporated in that as well. So like there's always going to be, when you're paying your mortgage, a lot of it's interest, right? So the interest on it is something that you're also saving. So what is preserved equity then, now that we know what equity is? Again, it's the equity that a homeowner has, and it's damage from disasters can lower a home value. So let's say you lose the roof on your house. Obviously that impacts the value, but there's a possibility of that damage getting worse. So like your roof is gone now, there's rain in your house, things start to get water damaged. You're exposed to the elements generally. And by repairing that damage, we can preserve or even restore the value of a home. So we could make sure that no additional damage occurs by replacing the roof. And then by doing the interior of the house, we can restore the value of the home. So by executing our work, we're assisting with income inequality. So obviously this is a really powerful idea. It's a way that we can like show what we're giving to homeowners. But I want to be really clear about this. It is used for measuring our overall impact and for storytelling. It is not used for appraising homes. I'm not like going to someone's house and saying your home is worth this much money. This is an appraisal. This is how much it's worth. And it's not used for choosing who we help. That's really important, and maybe like the most important part of this. some of the most vulnerable people have the highest mortgages, right? Or they might have more than one mortgage, or they might have had to have recently taken out a second mortgage to deal with the damage from whatever disaster we're helping them with. And therefore, they're going to have lower equity because they have more debt. But so that means they're more vulnerable. That does not impact, we're not like choosing people where we can up this number the most. It's just a way of measuring the impact. So how do we calculate it? And this is like the methodology that I figured out. We struggled with trying to find a way to do this. And I'll talk about like some of the challenges, but essentially a lot of the problems are, we can't like look it up on a tax assessor's website because every jurisdiction does that differently. Not all people have their properties on tax assessors' websites. They're not always quite correct, and especially when you're talking about properties that have somewhat unclear histories of ownership, it can be difficult to find them. We're not going to have a person go and like actually appraise a house. There's lots of, we can't just say every house is worth this amount at this square footage. So essentially what we do is we take a localized real estate value per square foot. So like this house costs $150 per square foot in this area. And we multiply it by the total home square footage. So the value per square foot times the total size of the house, and that's the assessed home value. It's an assessment. It's not an estimate. It's not an appraisal. Like it is an assessed value. It's an estimate that's like outside of the actual real estate market. We use that value and we subtract the homeowner's current mortgage value, which we get during the income qualification process. And that equals total homeowner equity. Then, because if we're not working on the full property, we will multiply that by the percent of the property we're working on. So 1,000 square foot house, we're working on 200 square feet of it, we'll multiply the total homeowner equity times 20%. And that's the amount of equity that SBP is helping that homeowner preserve. So what does that look like? Here's an example. So again, like 150 square foot house, or 150 square foot dollars per square foot value, and 1,000 square foot house. The house theoretically on the market would be worth $150,000 in theory. $150,000 minus the person's current mortgage value, which we'll say is $50,000, equals $100,000. That's because they owe $50,000 back if they were to sell their house to the bank. They would owe $50,000, and then they would be left with $100,000. Then the 100,000 will multiply by the percentage of the house we're working on. So we're saying we're working on 300 square feet of this house. That's 30% of the house. So we're preserving $30,000 in equity for this particular homeowner. So where am I getting these values? The amount we use for value per square foot is based on the Zillow Home Value Index. So many of you may be familiar with Zillow. Like if you go and look at stalk people's houses and see how much they paid for them, that kind of thing. They have a really robust data team in the background. Their algorithm's really cool and complicated. And honestly, like the paper that they've published about it is well above my comprehension, but it's a publicly available data set. It's something that like you can go look at. There are some values that are available online, some are not. We do have special permission to use the data set in this way. It is a free data set to access. There are terms of use. We are creating a derivative calculation with it, which is technically not within their terms of use anymore, but they're allowing us to continue using it because they see the value in us measuring this. The only catch here is we have to include the information that's at the bottom of the slide when we talk about it. So it represents the typical home value for a region. So it's looking at like the median home value in an area. And it can be sliced in a ton of different ways. There are things like you can slice it by rentals, you can slice it by multifamily units, like you can get upper quartile and lower quartile. So like people that fall lower and higher in the income scale. But we are just using like the median value and doing it by square foot by zip code so that we're like able to localize the data. So for each year to calculate this, we determine one value for each region we're going to work in. So for instance, in New Orleans, the past couple of years, we've created two values. So we have NOLA houses and SELA houses. So the NOLA houses are like Orleans Parish, and then Selah would be like Homa and like Terrebonne and stuff, because the values are really different and we don't want to conflate those. Someone that's looking for a house in Homa is not like paying New Orleans prices. So to do that, what we would do is take the values from all of the houses for the previous year. So I go and I find the zip code of every property that we worked at in the New Orleans operating site last year. So all NOLA properties, all Selah properties, and I get their zip codes. And then I put those zip codes into an API and get this value back that I'm looking for the end of the previous year. So like December 2023. And I have this like long list of numbers, and then I sort them from smallest to largest, and I find the median. So the median value is like the middle value of all of those, and it's a more representative number than an average would be. So like an average would take like, let's say the values are 100, 300, and 1,000. So if I average those, it's going to be much higher than the median, which it would be $700 per square foot. But the average would be $700 per square foot. The median would be 300, which is more representative of the community. So when we're working with new sites, we try to use zip codes around the radius of the office. So like if we're setting up a whole site, we'll pull the office zip code and try to use that as our initial value. And then future years, when we'd use the properties we work on, we've also used the zip codes from like mucking gut addresses when we've previously done immediate response in an area. But essentially, like we're determining this one value we're going to use for the year. So you guys will see this in the NTP, which actually maybe I should bring that up. But you guys will see this on the NTP when you're filling it out. Like when you click on the drop down and choose your region, that determines what value it multiplies by on the front page where it calculates the preserved equity. So the considerations that were made when we did this, the raw data calculation will remain consistent. So Zillow makes a point of notifying users of any methodology changes, any changes to it would be like are communicated. In fact, there was a major change last year that like kind of right-sized some numbers. We like, out of curiosity, I did actually go back and like recalculate the preserved equity for the entire year. It was slightly different, nothing really worth writing home about. Again, it's like a storytelling number. It doesn't require the client's home to be on a specific website. I don't have to look on like realtor.com or Zillow itself to find a client's home. If we know the square footage, we don't have to like go on there. It also doesn't require that anyone on our team is responsible for like looking up individual values. It's not like client services now has to like, go to the assessor's website every time. And it doesn't require that the client have maintained specific documentation themselves. Like we don't need their title and like original bill of sale that shows how much they paid for it or like anything else. We don't need their tax bill. And then again, it can be automatically calculated based on the size of the house. So we just really need the measurements of the house, which is something that's like pretty easy for us to capture if we're not capturing already. We are always capturing the square footage we're working on, and just like capturing the additional square footage may be the only work there. So yeah, that's it in terms of like my presentation, but I'm happy to either show you the NTP and show you how that works in practice or answer questions or both. So, and also I just want to note that Mike Sullivan, presented this with Rita Platt, who actually used to work at SBP. And at the National VOAD conference, the Voluntary Organizations After Disaster, as a method of like showing impact in a different way and how AmeriCorps can amplify the effect of that. So that was really cool. And that's what most of these slides are from. The question in the comments. So liability doesn't refer to loss or legal action. It refers to a liability just means something that you owe. So when we're talking about like accounting terms, you have assets and liabilities. So like for you, Ethan, like an asset could be like your car, and then like the liability would be the note on your car, like the loan you took out. It's like the part of it that you would owe to somebody else. So it's like, it's not like an estimated cost of what would happen if like somebody lost their house or like they had to go through arbitration or something. It's the amount that they owe somebody else for their house. So like when you take out a mortgage. Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions? Really? None? I will show you guys the NTP. Um, Actually, I can't find, I don't see the most recent one, but I actually will show you guys. I can show you the current preserved equity. Um, switch one, share. Okay. So this is actually like the current measurement for this year. So you can see like how it's shaken out. It's divided by operating site, and then if they're within the operating site, if there are different values, it's there as well. I believe this is getting some tweaks though right now. I met with Ethan yesterday and there are some errors that I had pulled in here, but this is just about right. So what's really interesting is like looking at how it has changed over time. Like last year we had, as some sites were winding down, we had 1 or 2 months that ended up being 10,000 or $10 million in preserved equity. But you can also see like how property values affect this. So where we're currently working in like South Florida versus the Florida Panhandle, the values of the homes are significantly different. So these could represent like the same number of houses, but the value per square foot is like a huge difference. And in fact, do I have that on this? I don't. Yeah, values per square foot. So the values per square foot are these. This is based on last year's numbers. So it's $214 per square foot in the area where we're working on Hurricane Ian projects. But for the Panhandle, like Bay County, it's $155. So it's a huge, huge difference. Yeah, and like again, like I was saying, we separated out New Orleans and Selah as well. So that's like $111 versus 127 per square foot, which when you're talking about like 1,000 square feet, that's a big difference in value. And this just like pulls all the data from the construction financials as well. Any other questions?
Kristen, I'll give you a question. I don't know if you'll have an answer or an example, but you shared about how you shared this at the VOAD conference. Do you have any other examples about how SBP has like shared this information and like the result, if there's been any like, yeah, particularly interesting feedback or investments because of it or just anything like that?
So I am less familiar with like exactly what we've used it for, but it is like a really common storytelling thing. So maybe if someone from development on the call has used it and they know, they can share it. But I know that we've used it for like, I know for instance in Southwest Louisiana, we used it to report back to our funders and like show them like impact. You can do like an overall ROI. So you could like divide like the total amount of equity we preserve by our total construction cost and be like, for every dollar that you gave us, we were able to get X number of dollars for homeowners in equity value. And then I'm trying to think if there was something else I was thinking of specifically. But if someone from development is on here and wants to share something specific, I'd be interested too, honestly. AmeriCorps in general has been really interested in this number, though they think it's an interesting way of measuring it. It's like the disaster services unit specifically that we're a part of, that Rita is in charge of. So.
Kristen, I've never had someone make an investment solely because of this, but I do think it's been really helpful to be able to talk about the importance of preserving home equity. It's something that a lot of our donors are curious about from an equity perspective, both in terms of like the money that we're saving, but also equity is like a social issue. And so, we talk about the fact that as a generational tool, this is incredibly important. And so it has been a compelling storytelling piece for us. It's something that we can talk about our broad impact over a year. So those are the kinds of things that we typically use it with, but it's not necessarily the key KPI that we're reporting back to our partners with, which is,
Of course.
Probably a good thing
Yeah.
for all of the reasons that you can imagine, but definitely a tool in our tool belt that people are impressed by and invested in.
Is anyone interested in like more nitty-gritty math stuff? Because I can explain also we trim it to make sure that we're not like overstating it, but it's kind of in the weeds. Anyone wants to hear a bunch of math things, I can tell you. But Brian, yes. Jessica, yes. Okay. So basically, when we started doing this, there was a realization that certain services that we do for people, like estimating the amount of square footage that we're impacting is dicey. So like, let's say we're doing like eaves on a house, or we do like gutters around the whole house and we're not really doing much else. But that like in theory impacts the entire square footage of the home. So we would say that like we're preserving $400,000 in equity and we're only spending $1,000 or whatever on like this because we have donated product we're using. And we realized that was like an inflationary statistic. Then we're saying that we're preserving way more equity than we possibly could be. We can't take credit for that, right? That's a really dicey proposition there. So there is a trim on this data. Like essentially for each property, or for each location, there is an amount at which we trim the ROI. So you can see over here, like the amounts. And so that what that refers to then is like, so let's say we spend $1,000 on a house and you divide that by like the amount we spent on it. So, or by the amount that it's worth, other way around, the amount the house is worth divided by the amount we spent on it. And if it's over a certain value, we're like, I don't think we actually preserved that. And the trim is scaled by site because the value per square foot is scaled. So like in Bay County, if the ROI is above $18.17, and I'll show you guys what this looks like, we wouldn't count the preserved equity of that house because it's just like, we really didn't do that. And it's a storytelling number. So we're better off throwing out that number instead of inflating and just like not trying to fix it or anything. So RAF, I think, is the only one right now that has one, which is like really good. This is actually the first time for sure that we've been including everything. So let me, I'll look at it and show you guys. So you can see like, this is highlighted. So the return on this is, the estimated return is like, for every dollar we'd spend, we'd impart $37.85 in preserved equity for the homeowner. And that doesn't seem right? Like that seems like, I can't imagine for every dollar we're spending, that's becoming $37 worth of home ownership value. The other values on here, like $5, $8, those all feel quote unquote correct. So that's kind of more like what we're looking at here is to see like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And make sure that like we're not inflating that number. And then you can see like by site, the average per house varies a lot. Again, like the Ian houses are like so high. So like the value per square foot in that area is really high. So that's very high. And then like, yeah, the trim is the same. For RAF and Ian, it's the same numbers. It's just like we were working on smaller homes, I guess there. And then you can see the average square footage also that we tend to work on full homes quite a bit. Any questions about that? That's really all I got for you guys.
So with
Go ahead,
this
Brian.
trim accounted for, like I get it and it's a good idea, but how does that account for, or how could we account for the fact that, so that center Ave house, for instance, we did her roof. So technically you have preserved the equity of the entire home by doing a roof, but the other house above it that didn't have a trim, we just did flooring, which really didn't mess with her equity all that much.
Well, so
She's
that's
getting full
exactly
value for that.
So that's exactly the point, Brian. It's like a storytelling value, and
Okay.
we were hoping those two things like balance each other out, essentially. Like, so we felt like we were just like looking at the numbers. Like when we originally started this, I worked with Keith and Thomas specifically. We would like, I would, for the first few months of this in like 2022, I would go through every house and we would look at it and be like, should this be included based on the scope? So it'd be like, whatever it said what we were doing. And we figured out that like, even if we weren't discounting like the specific houses that were like, yeah, we should not be including this based on what the scope says. If we did this trim, we got a very close number to it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So it's like, it gets us like a similar result through a different, which is one of the many reasons we can't do it by house. Like it's not valuable on a per house basis. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense that you checked it. All right.
Any other questions? Cool. Well, if you guys have any questions about this, you can ask me or you can ask Ethan because Ethan in finance is taking him over. And he might be able to speak more to like current stuff, but I can tell you more about the calculation if you guys have questions, and happy to share more stuff. Oh yeah, I can show it on NTP. I guess I forgot that some people don't see it. So let me find the NTP for you. If I can find it. Oh my goodness. There it is. Okay. All right, so this is the NTP template. And when a project is being completed, so like if this is where the calculation happens. So like if you put the total square footage of the property, so we'll just use the same one as I like used in my example. So we put 1,000 here, and that we're working on 300 square feet of that. And then we had a mortgage value of 50,000. You can see it's like giving errors right now. That's because like, again, every location has, I'm gonna zoom in also because I'm realizing this is probably very small. Every location has a different value on for their value per square foot, and that's how this is calculated. So when you choose an SBP operation up here, so let's do Puerto Rico. Oop, there's no value for Puerto Rico. So why is this not working? Not great, guys. Oh, I think because I didn't put in one of these. Yeah, there was like a value not filled in. So so let's say like, so in Puerto Rico, the assessed home value is 214,000 for the 1,000 square feet. But if you read, or this is raw Florida, sorry, no. But in Puerto Rico, it's 102,000 for the same property, and that'll affect the preserved equity. So like this house, if we had it in Puerto Rico, it's going to be $15,600 in preserved equity. And if we were to do it again in RAF, it would be $49,200, and that's because of the variance in the price of real estate in those areas. And that's pretty much it. It wanted words somewhere in here. Any other questions? Thank you for applause. Ethan, raise your hand. Yeah, what?
Oh no, I just meant to do I wanted to do the emoji with the clapping. That wasn't. I misunderstood the hands. I'm sorry.
Well, just so you know, Ethan, it's the like smiley face next, like to the left of the hand, and there you go.
There we go. That's all right.
Okay, thank you all so much. And thank you for following along. And please do let me know if you have other questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Kristen.